The velvet curtain has not just fallen, it has been incinerated in the cold light of January 2026. For years, the public was fed a carefully managed narrative of potential reconciliation, a polished spin designed to keep the monarchy feeling human even while the gears of power ground behind closed doors. But today, the mask has finally dropped, revealing a reality that many suspected but few dared to name. The formal and permanent exile of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. This isn't a leaked briefing or a tabloid rumor. It is a structural reset orchestrated by Prince William, the man who no longer views his brother through the lens of family, but as a systemic threat to the crown's survival. Prince William's bombshell decree represents a turning point, where the palace machine has shifted from containment to total elimination. As he moves closer to the throne, William has realized that a public institution cannot afford to be held hostage by the erratic actions of a rogue prince and his wife. He understands that the crown does not just manage feelings, it manages perception, and the perception of the Sussexes as part-time royals had become a toxin within the system. This wasn't a move made in a moment of anger, but a cold, strategic calculation to ensure that the future of the monarchy is no longer tied to the drama of Montecito. Across the Atlantic, the silence in Montecito is deafening, marking the moment Meghan Markle finds herself truly stranded in a golden cage of her own making. The high-stakes social placement and strategic networking that reportedly characterized her ascent have reached a dead end, as the palace has effectively severed the digital and diplomatic lifelines that kept her relevant. Meghan, một thời là kiến trúc sư của chính câu chuyện toàn cầu của mình, is now facing a terrifying reality where her media maneuvers no longer work. She is a strategist who has run out of moves, left to watch as the institution she attempted to humanize simply closes its gates and continues without her. Prince Harry is reportedly speechless, paralyzed by the realization that his self-appointed role as a savior was a performance with no audience left. He believed he was rescuing a victim from the rigidity of the palace, but the decree of permanent exile has exposed the fragility of that hero complex. He has discovered that he was not the knight in shining armor finding Cinderella, but rather the highest rung on a ladder that has now been kicked away. The man who wrote about genetic pain and spare narratives is now learning the bitterest lesson of all, that in the eyes of the king and the heir, he has become the asset that has fully depreciated. This is the day the system reached its breaking point and chose to heal itself by shedding the parts that could no longer be repaired. William's decision confirms that the monarchy has finally admitted it can no longer pretend that nothing is broken behind palace walls. If the institution wants to survive in a world that has watched the Sussex saga unfold in real time, it cannot go back to the fairy tale. It must move forward with a cold, honest vulnerability that prioritizes the crown over the bloodline. The yacht has docked, the past has been cashed in, and for the Duke and Duchess, there is no way back to the stage they once thought they owned. The period leading up to this bombshell was marked by a strategic, chilling silence that served as the ultimate institutional weapon. It wasn't a lack of communication, but a deliberate void designed to starve the Montecito narrative of its only oxygen, relevance. William observed as his brother attempted to pivot into a new lifestyle empire, only to find that the palace had already begun the process of digital erasure, removing links and references that once anchored the Sussexes to the heart of the British state. This wasn't an accident. It was the first phase of a clinical separation designed to protect the heir from the fallout of a brand that was becoming increasingly toxic to the monarchy's long-term survival. Behind the gates of Kensington Palace, the gears of the Monarchy Reset were turning with a cold, mechanical precision that the public never saw. This wasn't a sudden outburst of sibling rivalry, but the calculated execution of a shadow protocol meant to safeguard the future king's own reign. William had reportedly studied the patterns of every fragile institution that chose the truth too late, and he decided that for the monarchy to survive, the Sussex connection had to be completely decoupled from the sovereign's identity. The bombshell was simply the final movement in a strategy that had been in play since the moment the first faked photo or vague statement failed to appease a skeptical public. In Montecito, the realization is beginning to dawn that the privacy they demanded has been granted in its most lethal form: total institutional isolation. Meghan Markle, who once navigated the most elite power circles with the grace of a seasoned operative, now finds that those same circles have closed their doors as the palace withdrew its invisible protection. The strategic networking and the high-stakes placements that once seemed so effortless are worthless when the source of the prestige, the crown itself, declares the connection dead. She is now facing the content gap of her own life, where the stories of royal drama no longer have the power to fascinate, and the lifestyle she built is revealed as a stage with no audience. The bombshell wasn't just a statement. It was a confession of the system's failure to contain its own internal fractures through silence alone. By formally removing Harry's name from the official line of contingency, William has sent a signal to the world that the monarchy is no longer a family business run on emotion, but a public institution that refuses to bleed out for the sake of sentiment. This is the price of attempting to humanize the crown through honest vulnerability while simultaneously attacking its foundations. When you use the crown as a ladder for personal branding, you cannot be surprised when the man at the top decides to burn the rungs to save the house. Harry sits in a house funded by the very narratives he sold, realizing that the spare story has reached its final, unmarketable chapter. The knight has no armor, the princess has no palace, and the heir has no intention of looking back at the wreckage he left behind. The monarchy has admitted its mortality, and in doing so, it has left the Sussexes stranded on a stage that has already gone dark. They are waiting for a curtain call that will never come, realizing too late that in the game of thrones and perception, silence is the only move that can truly end a war. The consequences of Prince William's decree extend far beyond the emotional tremors of a fractured family. This is a clinical amputation of the diplomatic and financial infrastructure that once allowed the Sussexes to operate as a global entity. In this new era of permanent exile, the unofficial diplomatic immunity that came with royal membership has been formally revoked. For years, the couple moved through elite spaces with the aura of officialdom, granted a specific kind of institutional weight simply by their proximity to the throne. But William has made it clear that this connection is no longer suspended, it is severed. The world is witnessing the first time in modern history that a senior member of the direct bloodline has been systematically stripped of the institutional gravity that makes a royal truly royal. This strategic isolation is most visible in the sudden evaporation of the A-list protection that once shielded the couple in Hollywood and Montecito. The elite circles of Los Angeles do not operate on loyalty. They operate on the currency of access. For the influencers and billionaires who once crowded around the Sussexes, the allure was never just the couple themselves. It was the proximity to the most enduring and powerful brand in the world. With William's bombshell confirmation that the palace gates are locked forever, that proximity has vanished. Meghan Markle is reportedly discovering that when the royal standard is lowered, the private jets and the exclusive invitations begin to stop. The social architecture she meticulously climbed is proving to be as fragile as a house of cards without the crown as its foundation. The decree also strikes at something vital in the corridors of power: the flow of information and legitimacy. By declaring a state of permanent exile, William has neutralized the Sussexes' ability to sell stories as insiders. If you are no longer on the inside, and if the institution has formally moved on without you, the value of your secrets begins to plummet. Harry is now facing the reality that the spare brand is a finite resource. He has sold the opening chapters of his frustration, but without new access or a credible link to the future of the monarchy, he is just another celebrity living in a gated community. The institution has outmaneuvered him by simply becoming inaccessible, leaving him with nothing to offer but increasingly outdated memories. In the cold rooms of Kensington Palace, the decision was made that the Sussexes must be allowed to fail on their own terms, without the safety net of the royal legal and media apparatus. This means no more back-channel interventions for security, no more palace support for international diplomatic arrangements, and no more diplomatic rituals at borders. They are being forced to navigate the world as private citizens, a transition that is proving to be a devastating shock to a system that has been pampered by the state since birth. William's move confirms that the monarchy is no longer willing to underwrite the couple's lifestyle or their litigation. The royal bank is closed, and the credit of the Sussex name has been downgraded to junk status. As the sun sets over the Pacific, the Duke and Duchess are left to contemplate the collapse of a strategy that relied on the very institution they sought to diminish. They believed the crown would always be there as a backstop, a permanent insurance policy against their own commercial failures. But William has liquidated that policy himself, using the Bombshell decree to announce that the monarchy has moved to a king and heir model that simply has no room for the Montecito branch. The silence from London is not a lack of concern, it is the total absence of obligation. The message is as sharp as a blade. You chose to leave the family, but the institution has chosen to leave you. The concept of the golden handshake is no longer a whispered theory in the back rooms of intelligence circles. It has become the physical reality of the Sussexes' new, isolated existence. As William moves to finalize the terms of this permanent exile, the question of financial independence has shifted from a proud boast to a crushing burden. In the world of elite power brokering, there is no such thing as a free gift, and the $500,000 chopard earrings that once symbolized Meghan's proximity to the Gulf elite have now become a lead weight around her neck. This wasn't a wedding present from a friend. It was a severance package, a high-stakes thank you for your discretion from a world that the palace has now effectively boarded up. By cutting the financial and institutional ties, William has forced Harry and Meghan to realize that they are no longer an investment for the crown or the global elite, but a liability whose accounts have been fully and finally settled. The Monarchy Reset has systematically dismantled the Sussexes' primary source of leverage, the perception of their future influence. When William drops the bombshell of permanent exile, he isn't just removing a title, he is taking away the return on investment for every financier and power broker who once bet on the Sussexes' potential. Meghan, once the reported master of the sea audition and the shadow manifest, now finds that the currency of her royal connection has been devalued to zero. The strategic social placements, orchestrated by figures like Marcus Anderson, relied on the assumption that Harry would eventually return to the fold. Now that William has scorched the earth and salted the fields, the talent has no stage left to perform on. They are left with the dry husk of a brand that has lost its institutional oxygen, stranded in a market that no longer finds their royal drama profitable. In the cold, clinical calculation of Kensington Palace, the decision was made that the Sussexes must be allowed to experience the full, unvarnished weight of their chosen freedom. This means the end of the royal subsidy, not just in terms of liquid assets, but in terms of the invisible doors that open exclusively for members of the firm. William understands that for the monarchy to survive, it must be seen as a meritocracy of service, not a revolving door for celebrity influencers. By casting Harry and Meghan into permanent exile, he has effectively declared them bankrupt in the world of royal legitimacy. The blood diamond controversy was just a symptom of a much larger disease, the attempt to mix the sacred duty of the crown with the transactional nature of high-stakes social climbing. Prince Harry sits in Montecito, watching as the spare narrative he used to attack his family is rendered obsolete by their total refusal to engage. He thought he was playing a game of chess where he could force a stalemate through public sympathy. Instead, he has found himself in a game of compromat, where the palace holds all the cards and has decided to simply stop playing. The silence from London is the sound of a door being locked from the inside, a sound that resonates through the empty halls of their Californian mansion. The Duke of Sussex is realizing that the hero complex that drove his exit has left him with a wife who is socially stranded and a brother who has moved on to a future that does not include him. The bill for the golden handshake has finally come due, and the price is total, permanent irrelevance. The timing of Prince William's bombshell is not an accident of fate, but a surgical deployment of compromat that has been held in reserve for this exact moment. In the world of international intelligence and royal statecraft, information is an insurance policy, kept dormant until the target stops following the rules. For years, the palace chose to look the other way, allowing the Sussexes to build their brand on the wreckage of their former lives. But in 2026, as Meghan attempted a second, more aggressive reset of her image, aiming for political influence and a legacy that erased her strategic past, the institution decided to pull the leash. This isn't a data dump born of anger. It is exposure as leverage, a reminder that while you may own your future, the crown owns your past. The silence emanating from Montecito in the wake of this decree is perhaps the most damning evidence of the checkmate William has engineered. Usually, the Sussex legal team is quick to fire off cease and desist letters at the slightest provocation. But here, there is only radio silence. This is because they have walked into a legal trap of their own making. If Meghan sues for invasion of privacy, she admits the photos and the shadow manifest are real. If she sues for defamation, she opens herself up to the discovery phase of a courtroom trial, a process that would grant a judge access to her travel logs, her private emails from the yacht years, and a subpoena for Marcus Anderson. She cannot afford the truth, and William knows it. The palace isn't just winning the PR war, they are closing the case. For Prince Harry, the bombshell of permanent exile serves as the ultimate moment of anagnorisis, the point in a tragedy where the hero finally recognizes his true situation. He spent years telling the world he was rescuing a victim from the British wolves, yet the release of the Shadow Manifest proves his wife was a seasoned veteran of elite power structures long before she met him. He believed he was the savior, but these photos suggest he was the final assignment. The realization that his entire spare narrative was built on a foundation of performance is what has left him speechless. He is staring at a past he didn't know existed, realizing that the people he called prejudiced were actually trying to warn him about a strategy he couldn't see. This is the reality of the velvet trap. William has allowed the Sussexes to exhaust their capital, their stories, and their public sympathy until they were left with nothing but their own isolation. The decree of exile is simply the closing of the door on a room that has already run out of air. The monarchy has moved on, recalibrating itself for a future that prioritizes the stability of the direct line over the chaos of the periphery. By the time Harry looks up from the wreckage of his hero complex, he will find that the institution has not just moved forward, it has evolved into something that no longer recognizes his name. The past has been cashed in, the insurance policy has been used, and the Duke of Sussex is now a ghost in his own story. The timing of Prince William's bombshell is not an accident of fate, but a surgical deployment of compromat that has been held in reserve for this exact moment. In the world of international intelligence and royal statecraft, information is an insurance policy, kept dormant until the target stops following the rules. For years, the palace chose to look the other way, allowing the Sussexes to build their brand on the wreckage of their former lives. But in 2026, as Meghan attempted a second, more aggressive reset of her image, aiming for political influence and a legacy that erased her strategic past, the institution decided to pull the leash. This isn't a data dump born of anger. It is exposure as leverage, a reminder that while you may own your future, the crown owns your past. The silence emanating from Montecito in the wake of this decree is perhaps the most damning evidence of the checkmate William has engineered. Usually, the Sussex legal team is quick to fire off cease and desist letters at the slightest provocation. But here, there is only radio silence. This is because they have walked into a legal trap of their own making. If Meghan sues for invasion of privacy, she admits the photos and the shadow manifest are real. If she sues for defamation, she opens herself up to the discovery phase of a courtroom trial, a process that would grant a judge access to her travel logs, her private emails from the yacht years, and a subpoena for Marcus Anderson. She cannot afford the truth, and William knows it. The palace isn't just winning the PR war, they are closing the case. For Prince Harry, the bombshell of permanent exile serves as the ultimate moment of anagnorisis, the point in a tragedy where the hero finally recognizes his true situation. He spent years telling the world he was rescuing a victim from the British wolves, yet the release of the Shadow Manifest proves his wife was a seasoned veteran of elite power structures long before she met him. He believed he was the savior, but these photos suggest he was the final assignment. The realization that his entire spare narrative was built on a foundation of performance is what has left him speechless. He is staring at a past he didn't know existed, realizing that the people he called prejudiced were actually trying to warn him about a strategy he couldn't see. This is the reality of the velvet trap. William has allowed the Sussexes to exhaust their capital, their stories, and their public sympathy until they were left with nothing but their own isolation. The decree of exile is simply the closing of the door on a room that has already run out of air. The monarchy has moved on, recalibrating itself for a future that prioritizes the stability of the direct line over the chaos of the periphery. By the time Harry looks up from the wreckage of his hero complex, he will find that the institution has not just moved forward, it has evolved into something that no longer recognizes his name. The past has been cashed in, the insurance policy has been used, and the Duke of Sussex is now a ghost in his own story. The bombshell of January 2026 marks the final phase of what strategic insiders are calling the digital beheading of the Sussex brand. This was not a sudden act of aggression, but the culmination of a multi-year monarchy reset that prioritized the protection of the direct line over the preservation of family sentiment. For years, Harry and Meghan operated under the assumption that they could maintain a rival power center in California, an alternative court that would compete with Buckingham Palace for global attention. They relied on a specific kind of institutional oxygen, the palace's reactions. By dropping this bombshell of permanent exile, Prince William has effectively cut off that oxygen. He has realized that the Sussexes' only real currency was their conflict with the crown. By refusing to engage and formally closing the door, William has left them shouting into a strategic vacuum where their attacks no longer have a target to strike. The silence from the palace is not a sign of weakness. It is a clinical deployment of institutional indifference. In the world of high-stakes PR, being ignored is far more lethal than being attacked. Meghan Markle, once the architect of a narrative that positioned her as a global disruptor, now finds that her disruption has been bypassed. The Sea audition and the Shadow Manifest leaks have stripped away the veneer of the struggling actress fairy tale, exposing the calculated nature of her ascent. Without the invisible hand of the palace to offer counter-briefings or defensive statements, her media maneuvers are hitting a wall of irrelevance. She is a strategist who built a career on the reaction economy. But now that the palace has stopped reacting, the economy has collapsed. She is left stranded in Montecito, holding a brand that is increasingly viewed not as royal, but as a cautionary tale of overplaying one's hand. Prince Harry is now facing the most brutal reality of his spare existence. He has been rendered obsolete by the very system he tried to modernize. His value to the global elite was entirely predicated on his relationship with the future king. Now that William has declared that relationship dead, Harry has discovered that his hero complex was a luxury afforded to him by the institution he sought to diminish. The financiers and power brokers who once funded his lifestyle are looking at the 2026 decree as a final credit rating downgrade. In the world of geopolitical chess, Harry was a piece that could be moved against the crown. Now, he is a piece that has been removed from the board entirely. He sits in his Californian mansion, realizing that while he was busy writing his memoirs, his brother was busy rewriting the rules of the game to ensure he could never return. The velvet trap has finally closed because the institution decided that honest vulnerability was no longer a viable defense against systemic attacks. William has chosen to lean into the cold, historical reality of the monarchy, that the institution is a machine designed for survival, not a family therapy session. By confirming the permanent exile, he has sent a clear message to the world that the Sussexes are no longer assets to be managed, but liabilities that have been written off. The yacht photos and the manifest leaks are merely the external symptoms of an internal decision to purge the toxicity from the royal bloodline. As the Duke and Duchess wait for a response that will never come, they are beginning to understand that in the cold calculation of the crown, the only thing more powerful than the truth is the silence that follows it. The pressure of this institutional vacuum is not just eroding the Sussexes' global standing, It is beginning to dissolve the very foundations of their partnership. In the high-stakes world of strategic social placement, a union is often treated as a joint venture, built on the mutual exchange of utility and prestige. But as Prince William's bombshell decree of permanent exile removes the last vestiges of royal prestige, the utility of the marriage itself is being called into question. Meghan Markle, a strategist who reportedly mastered the Sea audition and the Shadow Manifest, now finds herself tethered to a husband whose only remaining asset is a history of grievance that no one is buying anymore. For a woman who navigated the elite corridors of Istanbul and Dubai, being stranded in Montecito with a powerless prince is the ultimate failure of her long-term investment. The silence in their Californian mansion is no longer the peace they claim to seek. It is the sound of two people realizing they are trapped in a narrative that has run out of plot. This internal collapse is visible to those who know how to read the physiognomy of stress. The curated images of the couple, once designed to project a united front of modern royalty, now reveal the heavy toll of the velvet trap. The hero complex that once drove Harry to protect his victim has curdled into a silent resentment, as the realization dawns that the rescue mission was based on a performance. When the external world stops reacting, the internal world begins to cannibalize itself. The visible cracks in their facade, the forced smiles, the increasingly separate public appearances, and the desperate attempts to launch minor lifestyle brands are the physical manifestations of a system in total breakdown. Harry is looking at a woman he thought needed saving, only to see a seasoned operative who has run out of moves. Meanwhile, Meghan is looking at a man who was supposed to be her ultimate boarding pass to global power, only to find he is now the anchor, dragging her down into institutional irrelevance. The palace, under William's clinical direction, is content to let this self-destruction play out in private. There is no need for a data dump or a public attack when the pressure of isolation does the work for you. By formally closing the door and withdrawing the institutional oxygen, William has forced the Sussexes into a state of strategic rot. In the absence of a common enemy to fight the British wolves they once railed against, they are left to fight each other for the scraps of their fading relevance. The Shadow Manifest didn't just expose Meghan's past, it provided Harry with a mirror he cannot bear to look into. He is forced to confront the possibility that his entire rebellion was not a quest for freedom, but a final assignment in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The golden handshake from the Gulf was a thank you for her past, but the permanent exile from William is a sentence for their future. The tragedy of the Sussexes in 2026 is that they have become a closed-circuit drama, a show that is still running but has been cancelled by every major network. The elite circles they once inhabited have moved on, recognizing that the Sussex brand is now toxic assets in the geopolitical chess game. They are left with the dry husk of their celebrity, realizing too late that royal status is not a garment you can take with you, but a frequency you must be tuned into. By cutting the signal, William has effectively rendered them ghosts of the monarchy visible, but unable to touch the world of power they once thought they could rule from afar. The bill for their independence has finally come due, and it is being paid in the currency of total, crushing isolation. The institutional machinery of the British monarchy does not operate on the frequency of human emotion. It functions as a state-level organism designed for one purpose: survival. For Prince Harry, the shock of the 2026 bombshell is the realization that the firm he once mocked is not a family business run by an aging father, but a clinical sovereign entity led by a brother who has fully embraced the cold logic of kingship. William has transformed from a sibling into a liquidator, systematically closing the accounts of a branch that has become a liability to the national interest. This isn't just about exile, it is about the total removal of the Sussex narrative from the state's long-term strategic planning. They are no longer a problem to be solved, but a legacy to be archived and forgotten. Prince William's mastery of the Shadow Protocol has allowed the palace to use the Sussexes' own past as a containment field. The strategic release of the yacht-era manifests and the Saudi-linked financial connections serves as an invisible cage. By ensuring that the compromat remains in the public consciousness, the palace has effectively neutralized Meghan's ability to pivot into American politics or global philanthropy. No serious institution will touch a brand that carries the scent of the Sea Audition or unvetted Gulf influence. William has realized that you do not need to attack your enemies if you can simply make them too toxic to be embraced by anyone else. He is not just winning a PR war, he is executing a geopolitical quarantine of the Montecito brand. Across the ocean, the psychological toll of this quarantine is manifesting as a profound sense of abandonment trauma. Meghan Markle, who spent years perfecting the art of the rebrand, now finds herself in a world where the palace has deleted the source code. Every move she makes to re-establish her relevance is met with a wall of institutional indifference that makes her appear increasingly desperate. The hero complex that once defined their union has evaporated, leaving Harry to face the cold reality that his sacrifice did not lead to a new kingdom, but to a dead end in California. The man who gave up 1,000 years of history for a modern life is discovering that modernity is a fickle master that discards those who no longer have the currency of power. The Bombshell decree confirms that the monarchy has moved to a hardened state, where the defense of the crown is prioritized over the optics of a unified family. William's decision to drop the mask of reconciliation is a signal to the world that the king and heir are now a single, unbreakable unit of authority. In this new configuration, there is no room for the spare to negotiate or the Duchess to disrupt. The palace has recognized that the Sussexes' power was entirely derived from their proximity to the throne. By formally increasing the distance to an infinite exile, William has rendered them powerless. They are like stars that have gone supernova, visible from a distance, but fundamentally dead, their light reaching us from a past that no longer exists. Harry sits in the silence of his mansion, realizing that the velvet trap was not set by his enemies, but by his own refusal to see the machine for what it truly is. He thought he could be a half-in, half-out royal, a bridge between tradition and celebrity. Instead, he has become a cautionary tale for any future member of the bloodline who thinks they are bigger than the crown. The institution has proven its ultimate power, the power to forget. As the palace continues its monarchy reset, the Sussexes are being erased from the official history of the future, left to dwell in a present that is becoming more isolated with every passing day. The bill has been settled, the gate has been locked, and the machine has moved on. The Bombshell Decree of 2026 has fundamentally inverted the dynamics of the reaction economy that the Sussexes once relied upon for their very survival. For years, they were the ones striking the blows, leaving the palace to absorb the impact and scramble for a defense. But by formally declaring a state of permanent exile and allowing the Shadow Manifest to become a permanent fixture of the historical record, Prince William has seized the initiative and reclaimed the narrative. He has transformed the monarchy from a passive target into a decisive judge. Meghan Markle, who once branded herself as the ultimate royal disruptor, now finds that the system has disrupted her in return by rendering her irrelevant. The strategic networks that once opened doors in Istanbul and the Mediterranean have now become a digital trail that ensures those same doors remain bolted forever. She is no longer viewed as a royal rebel, but as an operative whose past has been fully and finally declassified. The silence from Montecito is the silence of a checkmate in progress. Meghan's inability to launch a legal counteroffensive, knowing that the process of discovery would expose her own logs and private communications, has left her trapped in a public relations dead zone. Every attempt she makes to rebrand or pivot is met with a collective shrug from a public that has finally seen the receipts. William has engineered a world where the Sussexes can speak, but no one is listening, because the institutional signal has been cut. This is the most devastating royal punishment. Not a prison, but a stage where the lights have been turned off. Meghan is discovering that her social capital was entirely a loan from the crown, and that loan has been recalled with interest. For Prince Harry, the psychological collapse is total. He is beginning to understand that his hero complex was the very mechanism used to ensure his cooperation in his own displacement. He believed he was the one standing up, the one breaking the cycle of genetic pain. Instead, the 2026 decree and the accompanying leaks have shown him that he was merely the final transaction in a long-term business deal. The realization that his brother, William, is acting not out of malice, but out of a clinical commitment to the survival of the institution, is the bitterest pill he has ever had to swallow. Harry gave up everything for a narrative that has been stripped bare by the reality of the Shadow Manifest. He is left with a wife who is socially quarantined and a future that is entirely hollow, devoid of the royal weight he once took for granted. The Monarchy Reset is now entering its final, most stable phase. The institutional machine has successfully purged the toxicity of the Montecito branch without the need for a single public shouting match. William has proven that the crown is at its most powerful when it is at its most silent. As the world moves on to the next news cycle, the Sussexes will be nothing more than a footnote in the history of the 21st century monarchy, a cautionary tale of what happens when you attempt to sell a heritage you do not own. The velvet trap has finished its work. The past has been weaponized, and the sovereign machine continues its relentless journey toward the future, leaving the ghosts of despair to wander the empty halls they chose for themselves. The finality of Prince William's bombshell decree in 2026 is not just the end of a family dispute, it is the closing of a chapter in the history of the British state. The monarchy has successfully executed its monarchy reset, transitioning from a defensive posture into a period of clinical, unyielding stability. By formally confirming the permanent exile of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, the institution has declared that it no longer recognizes the Montecito narrative as a legitimate branch of the royal tree. The velvet trap has finished its work, leaving Harry and Meghan as historical artifacts, ghosts of a crisis that the crown has already outlived. The institution has proven that it does not need to win the shouting match of public opinion. It only needs to wait for the noise to run out of air. Prince William, the architect of this total isolation, stands as the liquidator of his brother's influence. He has shown the world that a modern king must be a master of the shadow protocol, using the cold reality of the past to secure the integrity of the future. The strategic release of the yacht-era manifests and the financial declassification of the Gulf connections were not acts of revenge, but acts of purification. By letting the receipts speak for themselves, William ensured that the public's hero complex regarding Meghan was replaced by a clinical understanding of her strategic ascent. He has left the Sussexes with no cards to play and no audience left to listen to their grievances. Meghan Markle finds herself at the end of the ultimate sea audition. The high-stakes networking and the social climbing that defined her early years have reached their final, isolated conclusion. Without the institutional weight of the crown to offer her legitimacy, she is just another celebrity in a crowded market, haunted by a past that she can no longer delete. The golden handshake she received from her former benefactors was a thank you for a role she has finished playing, while the permanent exile from William is the sentence for the role she attempted to steal. She is stranded in a golden cage of her own making, realizing too late that in the world of the elite, when you lose your institutional signal, you lose your existence. For Prince Harry, the anagnorisis is complete. He sits in the silence of Montecito, staring at the wreckage of a rebellion that was built on a performance he didn't fully understand. He sacrificed his military titles, his family, and his country for a modern dream that turned out to be a final assignment in someone else's playbook. The man who wanted to be a savior is now the only one who needs saving, but there is no one left to answer his call. The spare has been removed from the machine, and the machine is running more smoothly than ever before. He is a man who traded 1,000 years of history for a handful of years of celebrity, only to find that the trade was a total loss. As the curtain falls on this saga, the British monarchy moves forward with a cold, renewed authority. The king and heir are now the sole custodians of the royal future, having successfully purged the toxicity that threatened to capsize the throne. The Sussexes have been relegated to the archives, their story a cautionary tale of what happens when the periphery tries to consume the center. The yacht has sailed, the manifest has been closed, and the gates of the palace have been locked from the inside. In the game of crowns and shadows, the institution always has the final word, and that word is silence.